The Rebel Capitalist Show.
I know through listening to you on Real Vision and whatnot, you're a bull on commodities, but I kind of like to get your opinion on the next maybe year, then the next 5 years on the commodity cycle, just because a lot of things are getting, I don't want to call them expensive, but they've gone up a lot in price, such as copper. So kind of where do you see commodities now for the next year, then maybe the next 5 years?
Well, it's interesting. So when you take agriculture, for example, the easy thing about looking at agricultural commodities is that the demand for food is pretty steady.
Mm-hmm.
As long as the world's population grows, you can basically draw out where the demand for food is going to be. So really calling agriculture is trying to figure out what the supply side is. How many acres are being planted, corn, soybean, wheat, so on. What's the weather going to be like? That's more difficult to figure out. So while I'm bullish on agriculture, I acknowledge that it's hard to predict agricultural prices past sort of the next planting season. Again, I know the demand side is pretty linear, going higher, but the supply side, well, season to season is more difficult. I do think, though, as you have when you think about the sprawl of the world in terms of population growth that has eaten into, no pun intended, arable land, that you have less acres being allocated to farming, but on the flip side, you have more productive farms. So I do think that, with all that said, agricultural prices will continue to go higher, but not necessarily to the same extent as others. You mentioned copper. Copper is probably the most important commodity in the world right now in terms of its usage, particularly with electric vehicles, which is obviously the rage. You need 4 to 5 times more copper in that vehicle than an internal combustion engine vehicle.
Right.
So just by that shift, you need more copper. And solar panels and even wind turbines, you need copper. And copper is just very important. And I haven't seen any copper SPACs lately. So the level of investment in copper mines over the last bunch of years that we've seen in EVs. So yeah, you want EVs, but you still need to get a lot of copper in order to create those EVs. So that's the problem with copper, is that you had years of underinvestment in a lot of mines, and now you have this inflection higher in demand. I think with energy, oil prices, every CEO of an oil company is getting whacked in the head with ESG
Right.
and fossil fuels getting a bad rap. And what energy CEO is going to really ramp up capital investment over the next couple of years? They're just not. They're going to run their business for cash. It's going to be like tobacco companies,
Right.
where they know that they're just going to get eaten away every year. Now, at least for crude oil, there's still going to be demand growing over the next 10 years. But you think about, they see the EV trend, and again, this whole clean energy trend, and they're just not going to invest aggressively, which means that there's going to be limited supply, which means, at least in the next couple of years, it's going to be higher prices for energy. And then you get into other industrial metals like nickel, and that's going to, a demand driver for this new energy age. And so I think that the demand side is not going to be met by enough supply, and we're going to get higher prices in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
But again, they're still commodities. They still trade in a cycle, and at some point, supply will meet demand, and these prices will go back down again, and you want to be out of the trade. But I think right now we're still in the upward part of that cycle.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out too that the best performing industry since the mid 1990s, I believe, has been tobacco. When you reinvest the dividends, so maybe something to be said for those oil producers. I don't know.
Yeah, because they've been able to offset the volume declines through price increases.
Yeah, because there were so many regulations that it prevented anyone from competing with the tobacco companies that were already in existence. So,
right. And now the tobacco companies are shifting into, other technologies that's trying to wean people off a combustible cigarette.
Yeah. What do you think about the gold and gold miners right now? Because everything that we're talking about with M2 and potential inflation, maybe stagflation, it just seems like gold should be going up. It's not. It's been going down for, I don't know, call it 6 months or something like that. Maybe the attention is more so focused on Bitcoin, but is that an opportunity to buy gold or maybe the gold miners at a cheaper price because no one's paying attention?
Well, let's put things into context. Last year, silver was up 42%, I think. Gold was up about 25 or 26%. And they peaked in August. Last year, we saw obviously a very sharp drop in real rates, a sharp decline in the dollar. And then the dollar started to flatten out. And I think this recent pullback is because the dollar has bounced and real rates have inflected up. But you look at 5-year real rates, they're barely off the bottom. 10-year a little more so because they're less tied to what the Fed is doing in the short end. But if you believe, as I do, big picture, that the dollar is going to be challenged by these rising U.S. debts and deficits, then that is going to be bullish for gold and silver. Silver has the benefit of being half the demand being industrial, and as the economy rebounds, and they're also sort of a new age raw material, particularly in electric vehicles and solar panels, silver, that they'll get an investment lift from that. And if you believe, like I do, that inflation is going to pick up further from here, that I think that real rates, notwithstanding this little move higher, will head back down again and go much lower, because I believe that the Fed will way overstay its welcome with its easing. They will be very slow, if ever, to raise short-term interest rates. And then at least at the 5-year, real rates are going to get even more negative. And if you do get the Fed trying to fight the market, or even through yield curve control, then you'll get even deeper negative real interest rates, which will be positive for gold and silver. So while it hasn't been fun owning it, I think that investors should own it. I think the whole conversation with Bitcoin is complete nonsense, and a lot of people that love Bitcoin, and I respect them because I respect the whole thesis behind it, to think that it's one or the other is nonsense. Right. It's not buy Amazon or Google. You can buy them both. You can buy steak and chicken. You don't just one, that they can both go up, because the thesis for both are still the same. And Bitcoin that's 12 years old is not replacing something that's 5,000 years old. It's just not happening. And while a 25-year-old may think that because Bitcoin is the new cool thing, and again, I think Bitcoin is there's a lot to it, and it's not going anywhere. To think that it has to replace gold, I think, is nonsense. It can complement it, not replace it.